Now to the US, where New York City and the wider region in the Northeast is counting the cost of devastating floods caused by Storm Ida. With dozens of deaths in New York and neighboring New Jersey, there's a sense of shock at the sudden impact of the storm caused by the remnants of Ida, which blasted ashore as one of the most powerful hurricanes ever to hit the United States, bringing death and destruction from the Gulf of Mexico to the northeast coast. In the so-called Big Apple, some drowned whilst trapped in basement apartments, others when floodwaters swept their cars away. In Pennsylvania, emergency service workers said thousands of rescue missions had been carried out. Well, for more on this, let's cross to New York and speak to the Nigerian-American politician George Onuorah, who lives in New York and ran for city council there. George, good to see you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Tell us more about the impact of the storm in New York, where you live and work. I mean, there are reports of entire neighborhoods underwater, the subway completely flooded. In many ways, I mean, the story is really about endless amounts of water.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. It's really a very frightening and horrible experience. The last 24 hours, couple of nights ago, we had a very terrible after effect of Ida hurricane, and unfortunately we had loss of life in New York City. 15 died as a result. Like you said, most of the people were trapped in the basement apartments. Declared a state of emergency in New York State. Follow after the call by our governor, Kathy Hochul, and the mayor of New York City, Mayor Bill de Blasio. So it was a very horrendous experience that happened.
So I can well imagine. I mean, we've seen pictures of cars completely submerged, articulated lorries poking just above the water, buses floating away. I mean, it looks terrifying, especially for people like you who are actually there in New York where it's all happening. I mean, what sort of experience, personal experience, did you have with it?
My personal experience is that, I was actually observing what was going on, looking through my window where I live in Queens, and couldn't imagine it. Cars, you can use a canoe to drive by the street. Every place was underwater. We had 3 inches of rain in just about 1 hour period. And as I speak to you now, we don't have hot water where I live. You have to boil water to take shower and things like that. But it's really very devastating. This can only be the only other comparison I will have was during the Hurricane Sandy in 2012. When we had 233 deaths, 233 deaths, and the devastation was total about $70 billion. But apart from that, this is really one that will be remembered for a very long time for the adverse impact to the system.
Well, yes. I mean, and of course, this is the remnant of Hurricane Ida that brought these flash floods. Everyone's been talking about the speed of the flooding. Give us a sense of over what period of time it took for these floods to submerge entire neighborhoods. I mean, from what you sort of observed. I've heard people say that they looked back and suddenly there were sheets of water in a matter of minutes.
Right. Like I said, it was like 3 inches of rain in less than an hour. I was looking through the window when the rain started. All of a sudden, I noticed water gushing through the street. And where I live in a high-rise apartment. And I was looking, the cars that were parked outside were almost half covered by water. And that was, what is going on? It was really a very scary thought. I just stayed up and watching what was going on and listening to the news. And the subway was flooded, and in fact, people had to be rescued from the subway system. Metropolitan Transportation Authority handles over 1 million travelers on a daily basis. So people were trapped in water was just rushing like some kind of a river, into the system, and it just behoves that something needs to be done to mitigate the effect of our dilapidated infrastructure system, so that some of these issues with drainage has to be dealt with. And of course, we know this is an after effect of what is considered as global warming.
That's an important point you raise, because that's what I was going to come to next. I mean, there have been calls for new investment in drainage systems in New York to handle more water and bigger rainstorms. Do you think that's what needs to be done to better prepare for this kind of deluge, and that the storm infrastructure in New York was simply not designed to deal with the scale of flooding, the subway pumps not able to pump water away?
Massive investment in resources to mitigate against future adverse impacts from this type of hurricane effects with the flooding. And for instance, also it brings to light the issue of entrenched inequality, because affordable housing is something that has been a concern for a while, because people that can afford to pay high rent in a city like New York have to find cheaper places to live, such as basement apartments, and that has led to some of the things that happen, because water was able to gush into the apartments, and then people got drowned as a result. So those are the things that needs to be done to address the system. There's certainly investment in capital is something that must be done to avoid this kind of catastrophic effects.
Yes, and clearly New York and New Jersey, as you said, I mean, as many people have said, were not prepared for anything of this kind. I mean, you ran for city council in New York. Can you tell us what, in your assessment, failed here? Because there were very few warnings and alerts, apparently, which, if they were given, could have prevented the tragic loss of life. Was it governmental failures that also led to this catastrophe?
You said that hindsight is 2020. What I can say is that we need to prepare better next time. I know that there were ample warning by the weather folks that such high floodings are going to take place, and for people to brace themselves.
It's a pity, but obviously there are connection problems in New York, and as you can see, as we can see from the pictures, the place is flooded. There are electricity questions and so on, and clearly we're having challenges maintaining that connection line. But George Onuorah is a politician, a Nigerian-American politician in New York, who ran for city council a couple of months ago, and he was talking to me there from the eye of the storm, as it were, in New York, Queens in New York City.